Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here again, together with part of the writers and those who contribute to our second ebook with CEBRI. Special thanks to Jeremy Martin, who once again will moderate the debate for the launching of the English version, which is already available on the website of CEBRI. Well, this second edition was also challenging as the first one. In the first one, we had the pandemic, and in the second one, we had the war between Russia and Ukraine, which definitely impact the way the challenges, opportunities, and perspectives of the energy transition were being seen, mainly for two reasons, right? The role of fossil fuels for the energy security in comparison with the current agenda imposed by COP26 commitments. And the second one, the new technologies in alternative energies, such as green hydrogen, which, as a matter of fact, I had the honor to write an article with Bruna Correa, my colleague, who later today we'll talk about it. So the world is in transition, and the energy that will foster its development is gaining new counters in Brazil and abroad. We expect that this publication enhance the debate and contribute to the energy sector as a whole. So I hand over to Jorge Camargo from CEBRI now.
Thank you, Carlos, very much. Yes, I'm Jorge Camargo. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Trustees of CEBRI. And on behalf of CEBRI, first I'd like to thank and celebrate this partnership with BMA that allowed us to produce the second edition of the BMA CEBRI publication. And this last one, as you can find in the website of CEBRI, is about the energy in the world in transition. Last month we released the book in Portuguese, and now we have this version in English. You know, Carlos, as soon as we finish, as we discussed before, as soon as we finish the second edition, realize the quality of the book and everything else, the first thing that came to mind was really that we should have others editions. And for the reason that you mentioned, Carlos, that we have on the first edition, we have the impact of COVID on the transition, on the energy transition. The second edition, we have the impact of the war on Ukraine. And that shows that this is a theme that is not only very relevant and complex, but it evolves and it unfolds with the world events. So that's something that's going to happen. It will take decades to complete or to evolve. And as we go through the energy transitions, the world changes, and as a result, we have more and more material to discuss and to produce books and reflections, as this second edition of our books is a very good example. So another reason I think that to keep producing these publications, I think, in my opinion, is the quality of the authors that we managed to invite them to accept the invitations, that to write their reflections, their views on the energy transition. They are all leaders of their respective areas and as a consequence, the quality of the articles are really outstanding. So I strongly recommend you to access the CEBRI website and in English or in Portuguese to have a view on these articles that were written by these authors that I mentioned. And some of these authors are here today with us. Some and they're going to show their views on the theme. So I through these authors that are here today, and I would like to thank all the authors and writers that participate in this edition. Also, many thanks to the teams of BMA, and CEBRI that really had everybody that's produced a book knows how hard it is to edit, to revision, to diagram, to translate, and to produce a beautiful version of this book. So we are very proud. We in CEBRI are very proud of this book that we are releasing now, and already looking forward for the next editions. Right? So we in CEBRI, we have a vision of Brazil as a leading country when it comes to energy and environment. Of course, these two concepts, they have to go together. Energy and environment is indissociable nowadays. And thus, energy transition, it represents a huge opportunity for Brazil. An opportunity of economic, of social development, of international insertion. So it's a huge opportunity. How to transform this vision into reality is really what this book, these articles are all about. So again, my thanks, my congratulations to the authors in the presence of those that are here today. My thanks for them to be with us here. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor to Jeremy Martin. Jeremy Martin is the Vice President of Energy and Sustainability of the Institute of the Americas. The Institute of the Americas, another valued partner that we have in CEBRI. And Jeremy will do the proper presentation of our outstanding speakers, and will conduct the debate. So thank you very much. Jeremy, with you.
No, thank you very much, Jorge. And indeed, it's a pleasure for the Institute of the Americas to be a partner with CEBRI. We signed an MOU just prior to COVID, but we've been able to continue to work and collaborate through the virtual medium and again today. And we're very happy to again collaborate. You, Jorge, and Carlos Frederico both have mentioned that this is the second edition of this report and this collaboration between BMA Advogados and CEBRI. And so we're very happy that the Institute of the Americas can again be part of the presentation and this webinar, Energy in a World Transition, and the formal launch of the English edition of this year's publication. So we do have, and I am pleased to moderate an all-star panel. And we have a lot of panelists, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. I think I'm going to have an opportunity at the end to give some thoughts, but let me just reiterate, I think everything that you, Jorge, and Carlos Frederico have said underscores the volatility. And the fact of the matter is, I would say that in the course of the 2 years, both the times you all have written the report and we've worked on this event together, the key word is volatility, right? And the volatility derived from COVID, the volatility derived from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so you both have underscored just exactly how much that impacted and in a certain way influenced this edition, but certainly the previous one as well. And just exactly the extent of that in the global energy market, which is what we're going to talk about. And that's exactly why we're so pleased to have an all-star panel, like I said. And the first panelist, and I'll just quickly introduce by name and title, and then I'll pose a question to each of the panelists. The idea is we'll ask a question to each of the panelists to give some brief remarks, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. So please, those in the audience, feel free to submit questions as well via the Zoom question and answer function. I think everyone's probably fairly familiar with that by now, right? In terms of how that works. And so let me, like I said, just quickly introduce the panel. We have the first panelist we'll hear from today is Bruna de Bajos Correa, who is a lawyer with BMA Advogados. She's a specialist in infrastructure regulation and government affairs and energy, of course, at the firm. And as we've heard from Carlos Frederico, they are the principal collaborator with CEBRI on this document. Our old friend and colleague, Decio Done, who is back in industry. He's now the CEO of Enauta. I say back in industry because Decio, for many years, was the Director General of the ANP, the upstream regulator in the oil sector, oil and gas and hydrocarbons and biofuels in Brazil. Roberto Ardengui, who is the president of IBP, the Brazilian Oil and Gas Institute, longtime Petrobras, and another old friend and colleague in the international affairs arena. So Roberto, looking forward to your comments today. Winston Fritsch, who is a trustee emeritus at CEBRI And we have Winston, who will offer a wide range of comments. He's going to cover a whole host of financial and environmental issues, particularly land use, when we get to the conversation. And certainly, last but not least, Tiago Barral. Tiago is the president of the Empresa Pesquisa Energética, which is the energy research agency of the Brazilian government. Tiago has led that agency for several years, and he's a leading thinker on these issues around energy transition, and just exactly in terms of planning and regulation and the role of government. So let me, as I said, quickly go to Bruna, who will kick us off. Bruna, we want to ask you specifically about the question of renewable energy. And obviously Brazil is a leader globally in renewable energy, but broadly, and this publication is Energy in the World in Transition, talk about the intermittency of renewable energy as we see more and more deployment of renewables, and particularly the role of technology. And in that, I think we all are interested in hydrogen, right? Hydrogen seems to be, as we talk transition, a very attractive potential opportunity to continue to decarbonize and an opportunity to leverage technology in the energy transition. So talk about new technologies, including hydrogen, both in terms of Brazil, but as we noted in the world. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bruna, and then we'll have our panel. Thank you all for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone. Well, I am Bruna, and it's a great honor for me to be here and to contribute with the second edition of CEBRI and BMA publication regarding the energy sector. Well, as Carlos said, he and I have published a paper about energy transition and the perspective of hydrogen in Brazil. I must say that I am an enthusiastic of the theme because I think new technologies as hydrogen are essential to foster energy transition, and there are so many possibilities to Brazil to assume a leading role in this process. It is important to note that energy transition reflects a paradigm shift in the energy system, bringing structural change to the world energy mix. The world has already experienced energy transitions before. The Industrial Revolution marked the first huge energy transition, and at the time, coal became the most used energy source to supply the country's industrialization process. The post-Second World War also reflects a moment of energy transition in which oil took the place of coal and became the most used energy source, essential to consolidate a development model linked to economic growth. I think that these two historical contexts leads to the perception that energy, as well as the concept of energy transition, is marked as one of the bases for economic development. But the energy transition that is currently on the agenda, I think it's pretty much more challenging. Once it transcends to economic growth and energy supply, and also reflects a concern for sustainable development, global warming, and climate change. In this sense, the energy transition that we are dealing right now requires an even more intense change in the world energy matrix, with the replacement of fossil fuels for renewable energy source. And therefore, the challenge is set. Since conventional energy source represent 86% of the world's energy matrix. In relation to the electricity mix, fossil fuels account for 73%. When we contextualize the international trends that marks the currently energy transition with the Brazilian scenario, it is clear that Brazil has the possibility to assume a leader role in this process, given the country territorial extension, the abundance of natural resource, the presence of a consolidated regulatory environment, and the existence of a mostly renewable electricity mix. Historically, Brazilian electricity mix has a predominance of hydric source combined with the dispatch of thermoelectric plants. However, some changes have been occurring over the last decade. In 2011, hydropower plants accounted for 82% of the Brazilian electricity mix. Currently, this number reaches 65%. This nearly 20% difference in the representativeness of hydropower plants has been suppressed by an exponential growth of wind power plants, and also by the growth, a little bit more shy, of natural gas, solar, and biomass. These numbers show that Brazil has already started its energy transition, and the expectation is that intermittent renewable energies will occupy more and more space in the energy mix. But we have a point of attention. Because the strong insertion of intermittent source reduces the control level over electricity supply. If the generation park is dispatchable and controllable, the challenge for operator is much less, as it simply must control the supply level according to the demand profile. In other words, we can say that the operator only needs to ensure that the installed capacity is enough to meet the system's maximum demand. The strong insertion of renewable energy source reduces considerably the level of control over supply. This happens because electricity generation from intermittent source depends on the availability of natural resources, such as sunshine and wind, due to the impossibility of storing the renewable energy source in its original form. In this context, the operator has a double challenge because it must respond to variation at the demand profile, and at the same time, it must respond to variation at the generation profile of intermittent source. Therefore, the increase of intermittent energies into the electricity mix requires innovations in technologies that can provide operative flexibility. And you guys, it is precisely in this context that hydrogen fits into the discussion of energy transition, once it offers flexibility for intermittent renewable resource. There are different technological routes to produce hydrogen. Part of the expectation is to expand the production of green hydrogen through the electrolysis of water. And for this process to be fully sustainable, energy must be generated from renewable sources, which are abundant in Brazil, such as wind and solar. This characteristic of hydrogen, which is the possibility of its production from different inputs, places it as an element of integration between different technologies. And because it has the possibility of being storable and transportable, hydrogen can be used for both centralized and distributed energy generation. And it can also be exported to meet international market demand focused on energy supply and also on the reduction of GHG emissions. And therefore, investments in innovation are essential to bring economic and commercial viability for this technology. And just coming to the end, to conclude, it's worth to note that the war in Ukraine has highlighted Europe's strong energy dependence on Russia's coal and natural gas. And I think that this context will bring investments to produce hydrogen in Brazil in order to minimize Europe's energy dependence by diversifying its energy matrix and also by accelerating energy transition. This increases the perspective to consolidate an international market for this technology. And the goal that we have here in BMA is to follow up these new technologies development both in international and national context, and to monitor the construction of the legal regulatory framework necessary to bring security to the investments that are already being made here in Brazil. I think that's it, what I had to bring. Thank you everyone for your attention, and thank you, Jeremy.
No, thank you, Bruna. I think so. Wow, the points you bring up about hydrogen are certainly something we should come back to in the conversation. But I want to actually go back to the beginning and some of what you said in terms of the transition, because you talked about the post-World War II oil economy, the role of oil. Obviously, you gave some statistics. And where I'm going with this is we have now, as part of our panel, and we'd like to turn and pivot to the role of fossil fuels and oil and gas, with Roberto Ardenghi from IBP and also Decio Odone from Analta. Let me start with you, Decio. The role of oil and gas. Okay, we tend to understand it's 80%, 20. I think Bruna said 73% of sort of the global energy matrix is derived from fossil fuels. So what is, and obviously summarize and talk about the chapter you wrote for the publication, just exactly how the oil and gas sector will continue to play a critical role as part of this transition. And we heard from Bruna the extent of the transitions that we've been going through. So where does oil and gas fit in, particularly now that we are indeed dealing with the climate imperative and the urgency of decarbonization? And we'll hear from Roberto on this as well. So Decio, please, over to you. Great to see you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with so many friends. I think that the transition is going to happen in a different way, and we'll see some implications for Brazil. And I think we must learn from lessons from the past in order to benefit from this new transition. A few years ago, with the shale revolution, we shifted from the discussions of the peak oil, when the peak production of oil would be, and then we start discussing the energy transition. And the acceleration of the energy transition brought a new issue, which was the peak demand. I remember that before the pandemic, there were discussions on when we will see peak demand. Some used to say that it will be in the 30s, others saying that it will be in the 40s, and then we had COVID. And at the first moment during the pandemic, we had the impression that that the transition would be accelerated, that oil, gas, and coal won't be needed at the same level in the next years and decades. And everybody was discussing oil price with an expression that, if I'm not wrong, it was low for longer. That means everybody was expecting oil price to be low for a very long period of time, and that the world will be relying more and more and more on renewables. That was the vision, and I would say that was probably a kind of European vision for the energy transition. And it was a kind of a naive vision in which oil and gas and coal will be slowly reduced, and renewables would grow, and the society will have enough resources to do this transition in a very smooth way. And now with this new situation that we face, but even before the Ukrainian invasion, we have seen increase in the price of coal, and the price of gas, and the price of oil in China, in Europe, as a result of the end of the restrictions, the beginning of the end of the restrictions caused by the pandemic. And what we have seen is that the transition is not said to be easy. The Eurocentric view of the transition considered that we could offer a transition without taking care billion people without access to energy in Africa and other continents. So it was not an inclusive vision. So energy inclusion was not a part of that vision. And we have seen after the war in Europe that energy security was not part of that vision as well. So things changed very, very fast. And what are the implications? The implications are basically that we will need more coal, more natural gas, and more oil for longer. And that brings opportunities for a place like Brazil, which has an enormous potential for oil and gas production increase, and also enormous potential for renewables. So I think that this new transition, which will be more realistic, let's put this way, in a combination of energy security, energy inclusion, energy efficient, innovation, and probably some carbon tax in the future, will bring more opportunities for a country like Brazil for oil and gas production, but also for increasing our share in renewables, hopefully in the future to even export hydrogen or some other clean energy. But this is the implications. But we must learn from the past and be prepared for doing the right thing. We have seen that in the past, and when we look back in the past decades in Brazil, we can say that our successes, they were linked to some movements that we made, correct moves that we made. And I think we must as a country learn from those lessons from the past. And to conclude, what are those lessons? The lessons are that we as a society, we do not have the necessary resources to invest and to innovate by ourselves. We need foreign capital. And every time that we open up our doors for investments, we have succeeded. In every time that we tried to limit the access to capital or to resources, we have failed. When you look what happened in the oil and gas exploration and production segment after the end of the Petrobras monopoly in 1997, it's a huge success. Production increased from 1 million barrels to 3 million barrels a day. We didn't have the same success in the refining business, and we are still depending on imports, even exporting more than 1 million barrels a day. And we don't see the same success in the natural gas business because it was concentrated as well. We didn't open these two segments of the industry for other investors than Petrobras. Basically, the opening is very recent. So I think that's a reflection that in these pre-electoral days we must conduct and learn from what we have do correctly and what we have failed. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Decio. Obviously, another excellent intervention with a whole host of points. You know, I heard you say lower for longer, and I'd forgotten that. It's amazing, right? And that was only a couple years ago, which I think the lower for longer sort of theory or conceptualization at the time is today, as you noted, a very good reminder of just how difficult any kind of long-term, but let's even say medium-term planning for the sector is, whereas the business is long-term. And so this is the fundamental challenge, the volatility that we continue to see, and the fact that when you said lower for longer, I was, oh gosh, yeah, I remember that one. That was a couple of years ago now, and it's in issues of peak oil and peak demand. So the prioritization of energy security investments. Let's bring Roberto in. And Roberto Ardengui, let me ask you also. Décio didn't say it specifically, but I think I heard him intimating that Brazil has a real opportunity in energy transition with oil and gas, because obviously apart from all the other things he talked about, but within the framework and the opportunity is this concept of decarbonization, right? And so we are pursuing decarbonization and net zero climate objectives as industry, as countries, as the world. And so I think it merits a little bit of a point, if you wouldn't mind bringing to the table, in addition to what you want to share with us about the role of oil and gas, but this potential for Brazil to be sort of these lower carbon barrels, the more productive barrels that have a lower carbon footprint, a lower cost. And I think those are some important things that we can think about, because maybe we haven't had peak demand, but we are going to continue to see increasing restrictions, whether it be from financial markets via ESG compliance, or whether it be from net zero commitments that will demand certain carbon limits on barrels of oil and gas and natural gas as well. So with that long introduction, let me turn it over to Roberto Ardengui to also share some thoughts.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Let me first thank you for inviting IBP for this session, and congratulate CEBRI and BMA law firm for putting this together. This is a very important exercise, and I think that what Bruna and Décio and also Jeremy comments are very important to set the scene we have right now in this amazing issue that is energy transition, and how Brazil is positioned in this area. Let me start very briefly using my skills as a former diplomat. I just left the Foreign Service to join the IBP, but I have been in the Foreign Service for 35 years. And when I see what happened in Ukraine and Russia and the conflict in Europe, the first analysis around the effects of the conflict in the world economy were very serious, because the analysts say that the energy transition was being to be replaced by the energy security. That's what we heard a lot, especially in Europe and the United States, saying that the energy transition is going to put aside, and the first issue that now everybody's going to be looking for is how to provide energy to the world. I'm so sorry to say that they are wrong. What we have, and Jeremy, you mentioned the short term, the medium term, and the long term. What's happening right now is, of course, is a crisis, and in a crisis you have to tackle the issues straightforward, and of course that Europe will do whatever is necessary to provide energy for its population. But this is a very short-term issue. At the same time that Europe is doing a lot for producing more energy from other sources out of gas and especially gas and oil coming from Russia, they are putting a very ambitious plan for renewable. They announced recently €1 billion for renewable sources. So what we see is that probably, yes, in short term we will have some changes in the energy metrics, and but in the medium and especially long term, the energy transition is coming, and it's coming very, very strong. So that's I think the first comment I'd like to make. And what is the position of Brazil in this area when we talk about energy transition? I think the first point we have to raise as a country, as a developing country, is that we have to make sure that in every solution we have in the energy transition, we make sure that we provide available and cheap energy to the population. Because the worst case scenario for countries like Brazil, and I put India, I put South Africa, I put China, and a lot of countries in this same basket, is that because of energy transition, we will increase considerably the price of energy. Today in Africa, 600 million people have no access to any form of energy, any form of energy. So if you don't provide a reasonable and economic solution for those populations, you are just going to increase the inequality in the world, and energy is going to be the other name for inequality. So that's an issue, and that's why Brazil is so well positioned. And maybe decarbonization is one of the areas, and that's why I want to make some comments on decarbonizing the existing source of energy. If today Brazil stops in a snapshot to produce oil and gas, the world emission will increase. If Brazil today stops producing oil and gas to the world emission will increase. Why is that? Because the oil we are producing is low in carbon compared with other countries. So the energy efficiency and the better way to produce energy, including fossil fuels, is very important in this scenario. So the rule of the game here is technology, is how we make sure that we are able to provide energy transition, because the amount of oil that the world will demand will continue to rise up to 2030, 2040, according to every reasonable estimate we have. But not just oil. The world will need decarbonized oil, as we will need decarbonized ways of energy. So I think that Brazil is very well positioned, not just in the renewables and other so-called green energies, but also in the traditional energy in which we can use the existing infrastructure, we can use the existing projects, but to put a very strong focus on how to decarbonize and how to get a better oil in terms of carbon. Because in the future, and I'm talking about the very short time future, the client for the oil in the whole world will come to the oil producer and say, hey, how much you sell this barrel of oil? Oh, $80, $90. Yes, but tell me, how much carbon have you emitted to produce this oil? And if those companies, they don't have a good answer in terms of emission, they're going to be put aside in the market, and the client will come to another source of oil. And again, Brazil, because of the pre-salt, because of the technology we have here, because of the strong of corporations that are here in Brazil, not just foreign companies, but also Brazilian companies. I see Décio Doni here as one of the representatives of this class of companies. They are doing a very good job in terms not just trying to explore this amazing research we have in Brazil, but also in a very sustainable way. So those are my initial comments, Jeremy. I had, and I'm looking for maybe to have a kind of debate later on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Roberto. No, excellent. And in the points about, not all barrels are the same, and as we go forward, the role of decarbonization, and really being able to hit net zero, which is a perfect segue to our next speaker, Winston Fritsch, who will talk a little bit about both financial, and I think we just heard in Roberto's comments about, how financial investors and capital markets will begin to evaluate in his comments, the fossil fuel opportunities or fossil fuel projects. But I think more broadly, the financial sector will play and continues to play with ESG, particularly a major role. So, but also, and this is when in my opening, I said we're having Winston cover a lot of ground for us. We want him to weigh in on land use and deforestation in his comments, because again, if we talk about this topic and we talk about this issue in Brazil, we have to consider the role and the just exactly how important land use and the impacts of deforestation are. So with that, let me invite the trustee from CEBRI, Mr. Winston Fritsch, to talk both about the role of the financial sector for low carbon economies and this issue of land use and deforestation, where that fits in. So Winston, please, over to you.
Opening my mic here. Thank you, Jeremy. for introducing my talk. The paper I wrote for this book is in two parts. In the first, I present a view which is widely accepted, but it's interesting, and I hadn't seen it written before, which is the genealogy of how the financial sector went, and the big corporate sector, let's say, but especially the financial sector, went over the past 10 years from a view that, or even before that, from a view that was at best agnostic about the impact of climate change, to a view of risk, to a view of opportunity. I mean, this change happened continuously in three different periods. I mean, in the first period, where there were high expectations, let's say between Rio and Kyoto, at the end of last century, I mean, the financial sector was basically agnostic. I mean, it was something led by politicians, by the United Nations, etc. It was nice and high hopes. And then at the beginning of the century, basically because of the Lehman and the European crisis and the collapse of the European trading system and the collapse of the Kyoto arrangements, I mean, there was and also because there was a period where the US found less polluting shale gas. And there was a lot of advances also in the US, also in Europe, on clean energy. And there was the period of high diffusion of solar and then wind energy. I mean, the West more or less forgot about it. Okay? So it was not even agnostic, simply was not there. It was not a problem. However, during the same period, two things happened. The first, the advancement of computable climate models, which was an amazing thing, basically a result of high capacity of processing data, big data, and also, I mean, econometrics, etc., has created an increasing consensus, I mean, without crossing all borders of politics, that this was a real issue, and science gave a warning. And at the same time, China went from a country that was a poor country into the second economic position, the second economy of the world, using a 19th century energy matrix. And that was a blow to all the expectations that we were heading more or less okay to a net zero path through market forces. Okay. China falsified all those hopes. And this was quite clear after, let's say, 2010. And that explains the buildup of expectations again towards the Paris Agreement. And at that time, actually, the financial sector got involved. I think the multilateral organization have a tremendous job in that, World Bank, the OECD, and also a guy that at the time was heading the Financial Stability Board as its chairman, who was the chairman of the Bank of England. I mean, Mark Carney made a speech at the Lloyd's, which I think is a turning point on the vision of the financial system about, I mean, the view that this is not a problem, doesn't concern us. His view was basically a view about risk. This is a systemic risk. And this was the first view. And that was the view that actually got Paris moving in a way, but was not very constructive because people, I mean, especially politicians, they don't act very fast, even in the face of high risks, because sometimes addressing high risks do not bring high votes. But as science continued to progress and technology progressed, that's very important. Technology also progressed. Wind became very efficient, solar became very efficient, all sorts of generated distribution controls with IT, more or less mending the problems of intermittence. I mean, people began to see that this was a fantastic opportunity. There would be a new wave of investments in the transition. Energy transition became from a non-existing problem into a risk, into an opportunity. And that happened in the build-up to COP26. This is quite clear. The fact that the financial guys actually stole the scene at the COP26 is very important. I mean, the G-Funds, the Glasgow Alliance for Net Zero, actually took the stage and actually got the ball moving, approved Article 6, and I mean, gave a new lease of life to the UN arrangements and actually got the ball rolling again. Now, this is very important because now people see it as an opportunity. A lot of things have to be done to decrease risks. I mean, technology change is a risky business, but I mean, we're now downhill on the road to transition, because there will be investment going into it. Now, Brazil, and that's the second part of the paper, Brazil is perhaps the country that illustrates best the opportunity that you have on this transition, because of two things. First, because of our emissions footprint is very peculiar. I call it in Portuguese, in the Portuguese version, a jabuticaba climática. I don't know whether you got the message, Jeremy, or the Portuguese is good enough to understand this expression that Brazilian has. Jabuticaba is a peculiar Brazilian berry. It doesn't exist only in Brazil. So this jabuticaba climática is very easy to deal with because you have more or less half of our emissions come from burning forests, a quarter from agriculture, from cattle, and the rest from where the emissions of the developed countries come from, which is economically based emissions to get the system rolling in terms of energy, logistics, industry, etc., etc. Now, just by not burning forests or rebuilding forests, we can do the trick. We can get to net zero by 2050. But there will be fantastic opportunities also for industry, because that's the second nice thing about Brazil, which is the huge potentials we have in terms of wind, of solar, but special wind energy, and especially the Northeast. So we can launch a cycle of investment which not only will generate growth, but also reduce inequality, because the Northeast is the source of inequality in Brazil, regionally speaking. So this is a fantastic opportunity. Now, are we going to do that? Yeah, I mean, many of the oil gas that preceded me called attention rightly that you have a very easy way to the transition, because you have this immense reserves of natural gas, and you have time to do it rightly. I mean, and also our oil is a low carbon oil, so we're very well endowed to do the decarb phase. But we are on the brink of a huge change in terms of the competitiveness of green energy, or green hydrogen, sorry, and gray hydrogen. All the most serious studies of this change show that within 10 years, green hydrogen, because of the falling prices of green energy and also the falling price of electrolyzers, will be more or less on a par to blue hydrogen. So in 10 years, you have a competitive green energy source for hydrogen in Brazil. Moreover, the EPE has shown in its 2050 scenario that Brazil has 17 times more potential supply of green energy than demand for energy over the next 4 decades. So if Brazil will have a surplus of green energy, so the price in Brazil will fall. Bloomberg Net has shown in projection that in 2050, Brazil will be the cheapest producer of hydrogen, green hydrogen in the world. So we have all these pieces for this changing scenario of low carbon transition to green transition. But also the financial sector has to play a role, and the role is basically to do blended finance, because there are risks. The technologies for decarbonization are not there yet. There are risks. Obviously, the first projects of wind energy, large scale, I think the main source of wind energy will come from the offshore wind in Brazil, which is still uncharted territory. But when it will come. If you look 10 years ahead, it will be there. But you need blended finance. You need institutions like the BNDES reducing the risk of technological of the first movers. I mean, the first developers that tackle these complex projects. But that will be done. I think the BNDES is doing a good job. I think the whole Brazilian financial system is doing a very good job. I think that the Brazilian SEC is doing a fantastic signaling that people have to move to more sustainable practices. The Central Bank of Brazil has done an amazing job adopting a series of directives to diminish financial risk in the system coming from climate change. But the BNDES has a fundamental role of creating blended finance platforms to allow that this transition in Brazil goes faster. And also, I mean, the lawmakers have to change a little bit the legislation regarding land use in Brazil to allow for a more efficient attack on deforestation and incentivize reforestation by special agricultural producers. This is more or less what I cover in the paper, John.
No, thank you very much, Winston. And I think just, you know, implicit in what you said, but it bears really focusing on is that if Brazil does indeed, you know, have that ability and the opportunity to solve some of the climate and emissions challenge, it has a global impact. Because I find when we have these conversations on a country basis across Latin America, particularly Central America, the Caribbean, you see the impacts and the need for resiliency and the need for adaptation. But I think this is what you've highlighted is so important in the case of Brazil, not just for the country, but Brazil is one of the countries in Latin America that can have a material impact on global emissions by domestic action. So I know you've said that, but let me just like put it with exclamation marks there. And thank you for the Portuguese lesson also, by the way. I'm not sure if I fully got it, but I learned tudo azul earlier. So, you know, tudo azul. So I'm não falo muito bem, but we're getting there. And someone who knows I don't speak. So thank you very much, Winston. Thank you. I want to come back to some of the inequality stuff you mentioned as well. But first we have our final intervention. And I was going to say, someone who knows I don't speak very well Portuguese is Tiago Barral, who's always very kind to speak to me in English. So Tiago, great to see you, and the head of EPE. So Tiago, we want you to wrap up our formal interventions here and talk about, obviously, planning. That's the job and the hat you wear at EPE, and how Brazil is planned for the energy transition in the coming years. I know EPE does a lot of planning documents and a lot of forecasts. So if you could talk a little bit about some of the work you've done in that regard. And let me just add to the finally, in this sense, the role of government. I think this is something we've talked about and you've noted. The current crisis is perhaps in some ways seeing a strong reemergence of the role of government in the energy space. So all of that in 5 minutes, easy, right? There you go, Tiago. Over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. First of all, let me thank for the invitation by CEBRI and BMA for being here today, and also for EPE to take part in this publication, the second edition of this publication, which in my opinion is very relevant because it creates the opportunities for us to build consensus, find where we agree, where we disagree, where we should go further and investigate. So I think this is really important for us to get more people engaged in the process of energy policy, energy market design and regulation and so on. And I have to say the previous speakers have made my life so much easier now. And I think you will understand why. But before that, let me just mention that for this edition of this joint publication, CEBRI BMA, EPE was invited, and our director for energy economics and environmental studies, Giovanni Machado, was the author of a chapter on energy planning, the topic that you brought in your question, and obviously how it shapes the policy agenda and policy action. And I think it's interesting to recall that he underscores in his article, first of all, that electrification, low carbon fuels such as biofuels or e-fuels, variable renewables such as PV and onshore, offshore wind, nuclear, small modular reactors, clean hydrogen, and a number of other technologies are, of course, enabling elements of a foreseeable, let's say, pathway to net zero by 2050 in Brazil and elsewhere. And that obviously pose real threat to traditional oil and gas industry. And I think Bruna, in her comments, brought a little bit about this perspective. But in his article, Giovanni is also very assertive when mentioning the role of oil and gas industry today for social economic development, and that has a huge impact in Brazil, but also as an innovation powerhouse for the transition. While creating wealth, the oil and gas industry also help and can help more and more fund the transition and the innovation investments needed, including carbon capture, efficiency gains, digital transformation, bringing in renewables into the oil and gas industry, biorefineries, low carbon hydrogen. And that, I would say, in a certain way was present also in Décio's words and comments, and also Roberto's comments previously. So he finally, Giovanni, in his article, he finally calls the attention to the role of energy planning, particularly in supporting a strategy, and that's very, very important for Brazil, supporting a strategy to enable investments in the fossil industry that are really important for national and regional development, but preventing them becoming stranded assets in the medium and long term. And that means thinking of a framework. That's not easy, but that's the real challenge. Thinking of a framework that favors existing and planning infrastructure to be born or to become transition-ready assets, capable of morphing into a low-carbon industry. In other words, repurposing oil and gas and coal infrastructure. And one of the hints that we had here, Winston brought us the role of the financial sector in understanding that you can have oil and gas as part of the solution, as long as you plan becoming this transition these assets into clean hybrid, let's say transition ready assets. And the striking thing for me was to see how much this perspective focused on energy transition and implications for Brazil that Giovanni described in his article is so much in line with what Jason Border from Columbia University and Megan O'Sullivan from Harvard Kennedy School wrote recently for the Foreign Affairs magazine about the challenge of achieving this dual goals of enhanced energy security and affordability on one side and a timely transition to net zero on the other side. And now in the context of Ukraine-Russia conflict, that's particularly more important because the context now is even more complex. But the thing is that this article that I mentioned by Jason Bordoff and Megan O'Sullivan highlights three, let's say, market failures that bring the background for government intervention, but in a way, and lessons learned from the 70s oil crisis, be very careful with government intervention, but at the same time, how can we get governments to help private sector when lacking sufficient incentives to build infrastructure to ensure energy security? How governments can help that? How can governments help when market forces alone are not encouraging building infrastructure required for this energy security while we transition, and how these assets may become obsolete before the full return of investment is there. So I think, and also carbon pricing, as already mentioned. So these, I think these three market failures brought by in this discussion are, I see as the key and the guiding information for us to plan for government intervention for as little as necessary, but with focus on market failures, like I said. So I think this is the way to go. There are many, we have to be creative, but I think Brazil has a lot of resources and policy experience to make the things right. So that's my hope.
Thank you, Thiago. Wow. So it's exactly the top of the hour. So we are right on track. Wow, this is a wonderful job, everyone, keeping to your first interventions. We have a few minutes to do a wrap up. So again, I remind the audience, if you'd like to pose some questions. I've got a couple things, but you know, the 1970s, I always think about sitting in the back of my dad's car and him complaining or worse as we went and we tried to find gas, and the oil shocks of the 1970s were seminal events, right, in the world. Obviously in Brazil, it led to major government intervention, and I'm amazed because we haven't talked about ethanol, but that was an absolute government reaction and policy prescription to deal with the energy shocks, the oil shocks of the 1970s. And what today I think, you know, has become a global lesson learned, the Brazilian pro-álcool, the ethanol project, or you know, subsequent decades of government intervention or development. So I think this point of intervention, but also what I like to derive from the 1970s oil shock and thinking back to sitting in my dad's massive car that got like 3 miles to the gallon, is innovation in how we consume and innovation around energy security. But now we're struck with this massive balancing act that we need to do that many talked about, managing a near-term crisis with medium, long-term climate imperatives, right? And this is exactly what everyone, including you, Thiago, have just got done talking about. But let me ask a question, and then I want to end with a rapid fire round for everyone. And I think Carlos Frederico is going to make some final comments as well. But let me go straight to you, Thiago, because I think we've talked about this, and in fact, every speaker has hinted at what energy security means, but also what it means in terms of access, right, and inclusion, and stakeholders and social engagement. And we don't have to look very far to see in Brazil, in Ecuador, and other parts of the region, just the level of citizen response when there isn't either a quote unquote accessible price or access. So this question of inequality and this real potential that this near-term crisis deepens inequality on the back of COVID, which of course had impacts. So how do you, in the planning mechanism, and in your role in advising policy, take that on? And I know that's a really difficult question, but how do you manage delivering energy security but reducing inequality and ensuring access?
Well, so that's a very difficult question.
Oh, yeah, again, 2 minutes, yeah. Don't worry, I'll ask the others the same question.
But I think the way we can help in with energy planning is to provide data and modeling tools and scenario building for us to understand how can demand respond to short-term price signals, and how demand and supply can respond to credible prices that will result in medium and long-term response to prices. So let me explain a little more. Diesel prices go up, you have little to do. You just have to bear with it, and that is sometimes socially unacceptable. But if economic signals are credible and they are treated smartly, and the vulnerable are treated with careful attention by policymakers, then these prices will ignite investments in additional supply in the medium term, and that will bring supply and demand back to a medium and long-term solution. But if you keep intervening in the price, then you might be just prolonging the unbalanced situation of supply and demand. So what do we need right now? How can we solve the current crisis? We'll certainly need more fossil fuels before we need less fossil fuels for balancing security and affordability and sustainability. So again, we have to foster those transition-ready assets and transition-ready investments so that we can plan for this transition in infrastructure and assets more smartly than just going either this way or that way. So that's the perspective we try to bring from the planning side.
Wonderful. And I want everyone else to weigh in. Let me jump. Bruna, you're right next to me at my Zoom tile. So let's ask you, and then we'll give the rest a chance to think about a couple of sentence response to the same topic. Thoughts on the transition, but managing inequality in social and making sure not to have social unrest.
Oh, hi, Jeremy. I think it's a really tricky question because there is no easy solution when we think and when we talk about energy transition. I mean, we need to replace fossil fuels for renewable energy source, and we need to do it by through the decarbonization, and we need to guarantee the access of energy to everyone, and this energy must have a fair cost. So it's pretty much complicated when we look to the reality that we have here in Brazil. We have a country with a continent extension and with a lot of specificities in different areas of our country. And there are many challenges for us to deal with energy transition in all those aspects. And we have to make a plan with goals for the short term, middle term, and long term. And we need to balance the policymakers, the regulator, the operator, and the energy planner. And we need to balance all those national issues with international issues that come and has some reflex in our reality. That is exactly what we're dealing right now. I mean, we had a hydric crisis last year after the economic crisis that came with COVID and the pandemic. And now we have this war in Ukraine and Russia, and all those things have reflects here in Brazil. And at the same time, here in Brazil, we have a lot of social issues that we need to deal. We have people that are isolated from our system and the Amazon forest, and that need to have access with energy, quality energy. And I must say that I really don't know the answer. And I think we need to keep the plan and dealing with all the challenges that will come, and trying to build, to have a dialogue with different institutions and with the academy, so we can try to balance all those issues and focus in energy transition, that it is a complex process and that it's urgent, that we really need to have to deal with it. I mean, global warming, everything, it is already here. Climate change, we are already dealing with the consequence, and it will get worse through the years.
Complexity, no, absolutely. I mean, the energy sector has always been complex, but the global milieu. So no, thank you, Bruna. Winston, and then we'll have Decio and Roberto at the end. But Winston, stakeholders, the role of inequality. I mean, you've talked about the financial sector and land use. Obviously, both of those have huge implications for inequality and how to manage that side of the equation, right?
The progressive effects of investments with co-benefits, the social co-benefits in the forest industry is just amazing. And also the fact that most of the bulk of investments in solar, especially wind energy, will be in the Northeast, to have tremendous distributive effects. So I mean, this is not only it can launch a large, strong investment cycle, but one that has a very positive impact on income distribution in Brazil.
Delivering access, to be specific, right? So what you're saying is you have an opportunity to bring energy access to citizens who don't have it, or at least more reliable, modern energy access.
I'm talking about employment, I mean, regional employment as well. Fundamental employment, but yes, the price of energy will fall.
Great. All right, so Decio and Roberto. Decio, I think you were the first one, or you definitely brought up inequality and energy inclusion. All right, give us your solution.
Well, I agree with Jack. We will need more oil and gas before we need less oil and gas.
No way. How could you?
Yeah, but this crisis, energy crisis, is a result of a series of bad political decisions that led to reduction in investments and difficulties in financing oil and gas projects. The crisis is far from over, and the way out is through pragmatism, not through wishful thinking. Yeah. As we
Did you say pragmatism? Sorry.
Yes, pragmatism instead of wishful thinking. So, and the way that the energy transition was envisaged recently was much more like a wishful thinking than a reality. So now I think it's time for pragmatism.
Roberto, the diplomat in residence, I guess we'll call you, but final thoughts on the energy inclusion, and then I'll do the rapid fire one-word response round for everyone. Roberto, please.
Yes, I think, thank you, Jeremy. I think just to stress what other speakers have already mentioned, that there is no easy transition, and we have to make sure that we continue to provide enough and reliable energy for not just for Brazil and for the whole world. And in that particular case, Brazil is particularly well positioned because we are a powerhouse in terms of energy, either renewable or decarbonized traditional fossil fuels. That's a very strategic view that we have to keep in mind if we want to position ourselves in the future in this energy market.
Okay, thank you. I think the call to action has been received. Thank you all very much. So, all right, we've got a couple of minutes. Let me ask you about the game changers, because I think you all have talked and emphasized the importance of innovation and technology in energy transition, and just exactly how much of a role it's had already, and how much more it will have impact in a role. So let me ask you, one-word answer or two words, depending on which technology. What is the game-changing technology, the game-changing innovation for the energy transition? And this doesn't have to be limited just to Brazil, but in general, if you want to make it a Brazil response. So Roberto, I'll put the pressure on you. You got to think all the way to the end on this first question. So the game-changing technology for the energy transition
is carbon capture technology. That's the most important, and Brazil is also very well positioned in this particular kind of energy.
All right, I'm going to do an informal poll. All right, CCS gets one vote. I see next to me here, Thiago, you're next to me on the tile. Thiago Bajal. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so my answer,
more time to think.
Low carbon hydrogen, including carbon capture as part of the solution.
Oh, he went for two. Okay, we'll get half a vote for CCS, half a vote for, so you said low carbon hydrogen, and I think Bruna talked earlier about the different types of hydrogen. So, all right, Bruna, your chance to weigh in. What technology is the game changer?
I'll keep with hydrogen and storage technologies. Okay.
And storage, okay. But hydrogen and storage, we'll call that hydrogen. Okay.
I think they both have the same role in the energy sector.
Excellent. All right, Winston, you're next here on my screen.
I think short-term CCU, carbon capture and use, and starting now, but taking over in 5 years or so, large-scale wind energy and low-cost electrolyzers.
All right. You guys are voting for more than one, so you're going to throw off my polling here, but that's okay. Decio, break the tie here. There's a tie. Thank you, Winston. There's a tie between CCS and low carbon or green hydrogen.
One vote, carbon capture.
But there's a timing issue there, Jeremy. There's a timing issue. I mean, you need, if you look at a 10-year horizon, I think it's carbon capture, then the hydrogen.
I didn't say my question was fair, but yes, correct, Winston. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. what we should have done is said, in the medium term, what's your answer? And in the long term, what's your answer? Okay, we'll have to do that for the third edition of the book next year with BMA Advogados and CEBRI, right? So with that, I'm going to pass it over quickly. I've abused my moderator privilege and taken all the time. So over to you, Carlos Federico, to wrap up the session. A virtual round of applause for our panel. Wonderful. Thank you all very much. Fantastic. A real pleasure to be here as the moderator. Carlos Federico, over to you.
A great honor to BMA to be part of this project. I mean, it's a second year. I think, I mean, you summarize everything. This book talks about the challenges, opportunities, and perspectives, and I think we did a very good job on that. Actually, I mean, there is not only one answer. I mean, I agree with Décio in many things, and I think we haven't discussed this that much today. But the new gas market is, of course, should play a role on that. And I mean, I will liaise definitely with Jorge, because I think energy transition will need another edition. I don't know if next year or after that. I mean, it's a great honor for BMA to be part of this project, as I said, and we'll continue to work hard and try to bring off all the discussion. I think this is on the benefit of the sector and benefit of the firm as well. We are very happy with and honored with all the contribution that you guys have made and the others that couldn't be here today. And Jeremy, thank you again for moderating. You already have the moderation for life, so I don't know if.
Well, I'll abuse that even more by saying we got a last minute question. So put this in the edition for next year, managing methane, because I think it's a very valid point that our friend Carla Lacerda put in at the last. And I'm sorry, Carla, I didn't see it until just now, but the managing methane. So, all right, somebody write that chapter for the third edition.
Okay, we'll take a note on that. So, yeah, so with that, I will end here and thank you again. And we'll see you next year.
Muito obrigado.
Third edition. Thank you. Bye-bye.